Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our weekly Parsha Shiur. This week, of course, we are studying Parsha Bo. Parsha Bo being an incredibly unique Parsha, in that it is the Parsha in which we actually experience the Jewish people, experience Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus of Egypt, after which, of course, they become free. If you have, we have another dedication. Shiur is also sponsored Le'ilui Nishmas, Mrs. Rivka Goldberg's grandfather, Yitzchak. May his neshama have an aliyah. If you have a chumash in front of you, you can open it to our parsha, Perek Yud, Pasuk Chof Aleph. This is still before the Jews have actually left Mitzrayim. We are ramping up. We're getting closer to the final moment. Out of 10 plagues, 7 are articulated by the Torah in last week's Parsha. The last 3, the plague of locusts, the plague of darkness, and the plague of the firstborn, are articulated in this week's Parsha, after which the Jewish people leave Mitzrayim. Today, we're going to study about the plague of darkness. If you have a chumash again in front of you, Perek Yud, Pasuk Chof Aleph. The Torah dedicates only 3 verses to the entire story of the 9th plague, and here they are. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, says the pasuk. Hashem says to Moshe, Netei yodcha al hashamayim, stretch out your hand over the heavens. V'hi choshech al eretz Mitzrayim, and there will be darkness over the land of Egypt. V'yomesh choshech, and the darkness will be tangible. It'll be thick. It'll be able to be felt. Note, there is no specific warning here, unlike with many of the other plagues, where before the plague begins, Moshe warns Paroi, here's your opportunity to let the Jewish people go. Otherwise, this and this plague will befall you. In this case, there is no warning. The simple reason for that is because at this point, Paroi is actually banished Moshe from his presence. Excuse me, I take that back. No, at this point, Paroi has not yet banished Moshe from his presence, but nevertheless, no warning is articulated here, at least not to Paroi. Vayet Moshe es yodai al hashamayim, pasuk Chof Beis. Moshe stretches out his hand over the heavens. Vayehi choshech afelo, and there is absolute darkness, b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, over the entire land of Egypt, shloishes yomim, for 3 days. Lo yira'u ish es achiv, no man saw his brother, v'lo komu ish mitachtov, and no man got up from his seat, shloishes yomim, for 3 days. Ulachol b'nei Yisrael, concludes the Torah, for all the Jewish people, haya oir b'mayshvoisam, there was light in their dwellings. According to Rashi and the Gemara, the plague of darkness extends for 6 days. The first 3 days was regular darkness. Nobody could see anything, and no man could see his brother, in the words of the pasuk. After that followed 3 days of extreme darkness, thick darkness, where it was so dark, the darkness is so thick that people are literally not able to get up. Again, in the words of the Gemara, those who are sitting cannot get up. Those who are standing cannot sit down. It's a paralyzing darkness. All right. Again, there are different opinions among the commentaries. Does that mean that it was literally paralyzing, that they literally couldn't move? Or does that mean metaphorically it was so dark that they were scared to move because they couldn't see anything in front of them? Be it as it may, the plague extends for 6 days, 3 of which it was completely dark, the other 3 of which it was paralyzingly dark, and this is the 9th out of the 10 plagues. And the Torah concludes that the plague, as with all the other plagues, only affected the Egyptians, never affected the Jews. Ulachol b'nei Yisrael, and to all the Jewish people, haya oir b'mayshvoisam, there was light in their dwelling places. Okay, the Torah goes on to say that the negotiations between Paroi and Moshe continue, and it's eventually Paroi actually banishes Moshe, as I mentioned before, but I made a mistake before. Paroi banishes Moshe after the plague of darkness, And then the story of the Exodus, the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, goes on from there. But here there is, if you have a Rashi in front of you, I want to read just a couple of lines from Rashi's explanation, because here there is a fascinating medrash quoted by Rashi, which is unique, different than many of the other plagues, or I believe all of the other plagues. So if you have a Rashi, I'm in Pasuk Chav Beis. Rashi says, I'm going to skip the first 2 or 3 lines of Rashi. Rashi basically explains what we said, that the plague extended for 6 days. The first 3 days, there was regular darkness. The second 3 days, there was paralyzing darkness. And then Rashi says like this, quote, V'lomo hevi aleihem choshech. Why did Hashem choose darkness as one of the 10 plagues to bring it to descend it upon the Egyptians? Why did Hashem do this? Again, under normal circumstances, with many of the other plagues, if I remember correctly, with all of the other plagues, this question is never asked. Why did Hashem bring this particular plague? Hashem brought 10 plagues. You got to choose 10 things. What is there out there? There's violence, there's riots, there's you don't have that many options. So Hashem brought 10 plagues. But here, be it as it may, Rashi chooses to quote this medrash, quote, V'lomo hevi aleim choshech. Why specifically darkness was chosen as one of the 10 plagues? And Rashi gives 2 explanations. We're going to focus primarily on the first today, but we're going to read both of them. Why Hashem chose to afflict the Egyptians in the land of Egypt, specifically with a darkness. Says Rashi, Shehoyu b'Yisrael ba'oisei hadoy rishoyim. There were among the Jews in that generation evil men, rishoyim, wicked men, spiritually depraved individuals. V'lo roitzim lotzes, and they did not want to leave Egypt. Umeisu b'shloishes yemei afela, and they died during the 3 days of darkness. Rashi doesn't say which 3 days of darkness. Was it the first 3 days or the second 3 days? Be it as it may, these Jews that were described by Rashi as Rishoyim, evil people, wicked people, and did not want to leave Egypt, they died, during the 3 days of darkness. Why? So that the Egyptians should not see the catastrophe and the sheer destruction that befell the Jewish people. Why was it so important that the Egyptians not see the disaster strike the Jewish people? Why was it so important that the Egyptians not be aware of this? Because, says Rashi, had the Egyptians been witness to the death of these Jews, the Egyptians would have said, quote, Afhein loikin kamoinu. Afhein, they as well, they, the Jews, are also being struck. They're also being afflicted and tortured just like us. So in order that the Egyptians not see this type of catastrophe, death befall the Jewish people, Hashem had it happen during the plague of darkness. Hashem brought a plague of darkness over the Egyptians so that they wouldn't see and that they wouldn't be aware, period. Note, Rashi does not explain why these Jews needed to die. That idea is not explained in Rashi. What Rashi does say is that this was the reason why Hashem brought the plague of darkness over them, so that they would not be over the Egyptians, so that the Egyptians would not be aware that the Jews are dying. Why is it so bad if the Egyptians are aware that the Jews are dying? Because if they can see, then the Egyptians are going to go, look at this. We, the Egyptians, are being struck with the plagues, and the Jews are also being struck with plagues because Jews are dying. So in order to avoid this, they died during the plague of darkness. That's the first reason why Hashem brought darkness on the Egyptians and on the land of Egypt. V'oid, says Rashi, a second reason, also a very famous reason, Shechipsu Yisrael. Jews went searching. V'ro'u es kleihem, and they went to check out all the different possessions and the things that were owned by the Egyptians. Why? Why did the Jews need to take stock of the wealth of the Egyptians? Ukshayotza, because when the Jews left Egypt, So the Jews asked the Egyptians when they left, they asked them to borrow their gold and silver dishes and vessels and utensils. The Egyptians who were suspicious of whether in fact the Jews are actually going to come back, the Egyptians would tell the Jews, Ein biyadenu klum. We don't have anything. Omar Loi, so the Jew would tell the Egyptian, what are you talking about? Don't lie to me and tell me you don't have any gold and silver. Don't lie to me and tell me you don't have any assets. Don't lie to me and tell me you don't have any possessions. Ani re'isiv b'peischa. The Jews came to the Egyptians and said, during the plague of darkness, I took a tour in your house. I helped myself around. I walked myself in. I was in your house. I saw it. And it's in this place. You have this in the living room, and you have this in the dining room, and you're hiding this in your basement, and you're hiding X amount of cash under your mattress. The Jew says, I know everything. And so this way, the Egyptians were unable to lie about their own possessions and pretend as if they didn't have it. Once again, it was necessary, according to this second explanation, for the Egyptians to be plunged into darkness so that the Jews would be able to help themselves and see what was going on in the possession of the Egyptians, in the home of the Egyptians, so that when it came for the time for the Jews to leave, the Jews could insist that the Egyptians lend to them what it is that they had, and the Egyptians could not lie about their own possessions. By the way, according to the second explanation of Rashi, that the Jews went looking around the Egyptian homes during the plague of darkness, according to this explanation, it becomes clear that when the Torah says the Jews had light, the Jews were unaffected by the plague of darkness and they had light in their dwelling places, it doesn't only mean that the Jews had light in their dwelling places, it means the Jews had light wherever they went. According to this, if a Jew went into the home of an Egyptian, wherever the Jew went, there was light and the Jew was able to see. And nevertheless, in the same home, wherever the Egyptians were, there was darkness and the Egyptians couldn't see. Be it as it may, these are the two explanations of Rashi for the purpose of the plague of darkness. Again, number one, Rashi says, the plague of darkness facilitated an opportunity for Jews who were evil, who were Rishoyim, and who didn't want to leave Mitzrayim, for them to die during the plague of darkness without the Egyptians noticing. And number two, before number two, which if the Egyptians would have noticed, the Egyptians would have insisted that the Jews are also being struck by the plagues. And number two, it gave an opportunity for the Jews to go around the Egyptian homes and see what was going on there so that they could take stock, take inventory, so that when they left Egypt, they could insist that the Egyptians give them their wealth. Excuse me. In the words of a WhatsApp message that I got a couple of days ago, where somebody wrote, very cynically and sarcastically and very painful, but unfortunately true, someone wrote that the plague of darkness in Egypt is like COVID, is like the corona pandemic, in that just like the plague of darkness, it forces all the non-Jews to be stuck at home, and the Jews are running around as if nothing is going on. I'm sorry, it's sad to laugh, but it's funny. So like that, similarly in the plague of darkness, the non-Jews are all stuck at home. They're stuck with this debilitating darkness, and the Jews are running around like there's nothing going on. According to the second explanation, they're running around even in the home of the Egyptians, taking stock of all their wealth and everything that they have. Okay. This is the Rashi providing us with two explanations for the purpose of darkness. For the next couple of minutes, I want to focus primarily on the first explanation of Rashi. Again, Rashi says that during the plague of darkness, Jews died. Jews died. No laughing matter, of course. These Jews that died are described by Rashi as Rishoyim, evil men. They didn't want to leave Egypt. And so they died during the plague of darkness under cover, so that the Egyptians would not see the Jews dying. Okay. At this point, Rashi does not say how many Jews died during the plague of darkness. But of course, you all know, and we talk about this every year, it's quoted in a Rashi in the beginning of next week's Parsha, in Parsha Shiur, where Rashi says actually that 80% of the Jewish people died. 4 out of 5 Jews died during the plague of darkness. This is a Rashi in the beginning of Parsha Shiur. The second pasuk, on the word v'chamushim, which literally means v'chamushim olu b'nei Yisrael, which literally means that the Jews left Egypt armed. Rashi says, mechumoshim echad mechamisha yotzu. 1 out of 5 Jews left. V'dalad chalokim, and the other 4 sections, 4 out of 5 died during the 3 days of darkness. Okay, according to Rashi, this is literal. Not all the commentaries learn that this is literal, but according to Rashi, it is. Rashi does not say that, doesn't get into here how many Jews died during the plague of darkness, but this was no simple matter. We're talking about 4 out of 5 Jews died during the plague of darkness. Okay, so my dear friends, I got a couple of questions to ask you. Some of them are very obvious, some of them not as obvious, but let's think this thing through just for a minute. Question number 1. 4 out of 5 Jews died during the plague of darkness? Just to give you an idea what kind of numbers we're talking about over here, the Torah tells us 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60 left Egypt, including women, including children, including those who are over 60. We're talking about at least 2 million Jews left Egypt. That means, according to Rashi, 8 million Jews died during the plague of darkness. We're talking about, Rachmana litzlan, may Hashem protect us, we're talking about a Holocaust here. 8 million Jews died during the plague of darkness. Why? Rashi says they were Rishoyim. They were evil people. They were spiritual. Russia, the term Russia, those of you who are familiar with it, it's a very aggressive term. Russia is what you refer to somebody when they're really rotten. You know, you say, so-and-so is a richtige Russia. They were Rishoyim. They were evil people, spiritually depraved, spiritually perverted people. They didn't want to leave Egypt. The punishment for not wanting to leave Egypt is death? Why? Very difficult to understand. Question number 1. Question number 2. If this is true, then the story of the Jewish people's Yetzias Mitzrayim, the story of the Exodus of Egypt that we talk about, that we mention at every opportunity, and that we celebrate on Pesach and all year long, and that we make such a big deal out of it, is considered such a cornerstone of the Jewish faith and everything that we believe in, every Shabbos, every Yom Tov, we constantly mention it and talk about it over and over again. The story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, if this is true, the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim is a terrible story. Rachmana litzlan, may Hashem protect us. What kind of a ghastly, incredibly devastating story is this? Don't get me wrong, it's nice to focus on the positive, but by God, we're talking about the death of millions of Jews. And this is what we celebrate every year on Pesach. And sit around the table like free men, eating matzah and maror, and you know, once upon a time, going on Pesach programs, right? May Hashem help us and restore those holy Pesach programs to Klal Yisrael while He restores good health to the planet. I mean, this is what we're celebrating every year. Whoopee! 600,000 men, 2 million Jews left Mitzrayim, and they became free. What in heaven's name are we talking? How do we neglect to mention that 80% of the Jewish people died just a couple of days beforehand? The Jews were all in Shiva or in Shloshim or at least in Avelis, or whatever the case may be, when they left Egypt. 4/5 of the Jewish nation was decimated. And again, even according to those commentaries that learn that this is not to be taken literally, okay, it's not to be taken literally, but we're still talking about Jewish people dying, and they must have died in large numbers. It's got to make our head spin. Well, if this is the case, what exactly is this incredible Yom Tov that we're celebrating on Pesach? We're so excited that the Jews left Egypt. Dare I say, sounds like they may have been better off if they would have never left Egypt. At least they would have remained alive. 80% of them. Rahman al-Islam. Next, question number 3. Why did these Jews die? Oh, says Rashi, they were Rashoyim. They were terrible people. They didn't want to leave Egypt. Really? Not wanting to leave Egypt makes you a Rasha? First of all, Egypt was all they knew. These Jews, this generation of Jews who were offered redemption, they were born in Egypt. They grew up in Egypt. Egypt was the only thing they were ever aware of. It kind of makes sense that they didn't want to go. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know how they were getting there. They didn't know what they were going to do along the way. They didn't know that manna was going to fall from heaven and water was going to come out of a rock. They didn't know that they were going to split the sea. They didn't know that when the Egyptians chased them, the Egyptians would all drown. At this stage, they don't know any of that. They probably looked at each other and looked at Moshe and said, look, the guy seems nice, but we're leaving Mitzrayim and going to where? The promised land? How do we know what that's even like? It seems like a relatively logical response. All right, perhaps a spiritually lacking response. Perhaps they lack the belief and the trust in Hashem. Granted, I'll give it to you. But nevertheless, still, to call them Rishoyim because they didn't want to leave? Why does that make you, and why does that make you deserving of death? Next question. And the Jews that did leave Mitzrayim were such groise tzaddikim. The Jews that did leave Egypt were such holy rollers. They were such incredibly spiritual giants. Actually, that's not true either. The Jews who left Egypt, many of them were idol worshippers. The Medrash says, as they walked into the Yam Suf, they were carrying idols. The angels in heaven, 7 days after Exodus, challenged Hashem and said, why are you saving the Jews and drowning the Egyptians when they're both idol worshippers? So this incredibly difficult to understand reality is emerging here. All the Jews who didn't want to leave Egypt, or many of the Jews, all the Jews who didn't want to leave Egypt, died during the plague of darkness because they were Rishoyim. Their sin, not wanting to leave Egypt. All the Jews, regardless of anything else, maybe they were tzaddikim, maybe they were groise talmidei chachamim, maybe they were rabbonim and rosh yeshivas and all, doesn't matter. You don't want to leave Mitzrayim, you're dead in the plague of darkness, finished. And all the Jews who want to leave, which is only 20%, they all leave. Regardless of their spiritual stature, regardless of their belief system, regardless of whether or not they're idol worshippers, off they go. Forgive me for using the word, but the selection here of who gets chosen to live and who gets chosen to die seems incredibly dark and unfair. Next question. Rashi says Hashem made it that all these Jews who were destined to die and not leave Egypt would all die during the plague of darkness. Why? So that the Egyptians shouldn't see Jews dying. And then if they saw the Jews die, they would say, the Jews are also being struck just like we are. This is boggles the mind here. This is hair-raising stuff. One second. The Egyptians are going to emerge 6 days later or 3 days later from the plague of darkness. 80% of the Jewish nation is gone, decimated. buried in the ground, Rahman al-Islam. You don't think the Egyptians are going to notice that something's off? The Jewish people have gone from 10 million to 2 million. The Egyptians are not going to notice anything? The Egyptians are not going to notice that 4 out of 5 Jews are not there. Oh, says Rashi, but they won't see it at the time of it happening, because at the time of it happening, the Egyptians will be plunged in darkness. Okay, so they'll discover it after. And then when they'll discover it after, Rashi says, oh, we don't want the Egyptians to think that the Jewish people are being struck just like the Egyptians. This has got to be the saddest, most ironic statement of Rashi. We don't want what? We don't want the Egyptians to think that the Jewish people are being struck just like the Egyptians. At this stage, the Jews are being struck much worse than the Egyptians. Even the Egyptians, the Ribono Shel Olam doesn't decimate 80% of them. At least not until the splitting of the sea. We're worried that the Egyptians are going to think that the Jews are being afflicted just like them. The Jews are being afflicted much worse than them. And can we possibly entertain the idea that the Egyptians are not going to notice? This is incredibly difficult to understand. What is achieved by the plague of darkness, where all the Jews died during 3 days? And by the way, to think that this amount of Jews died during 3 days. What's achieved by the fact that the Egyptians are not aware of it at the time? So they'll notice it 3 days later. And what are the Jews, the 20% who survive? What are they supposed to think when they see all this? Very difficult to understand. Now, by the way, I know what some of you are thinking. Actually, well, I shouldn't say I know, but I can guess what some of you are thinking. Actually, we make mention of this every year in the Pesach Seder. Do you know this? Every year in the Pesach Seder, we make mention of this. Very briefly, because you all know what I'm talking about. At the Pesach Seder, we talk about the 4 sons who attend. The Chocham, the Rosha, the Tam, the Sheni, the Elishal. There's much to talk about it. I just want to focus on one part. One of the sons is the Rosha. The Rosha shows up to the Pesach Seder. And the Rosha asks all sorts of questions. What are you doing? And the Rosha excludes himself, etc., etc. You know what we tell the Rosha in the Pesach Seder? We tell him, my dear Rosha, Hashem took me out of Mitzrayim, me and not you. If we look at the Rosha would have been in Mitzrayim, you would not have been redeemed. Ilu Hayasham, if he, the Rosha, would have been there, he would not have been redeemed. Now, we don't quite spell it out, right? We don't quite say, why not? Because no Jews, no living Jews, at least in the simple level, were left in Mitzrayim. So why are we telling the Rosha if he would have been there, he wouldn't have been redeemed? Well, most of the commentaries explain what we're really saying is, we're really telling the Rosha he would have died during the plague of darkness. We're telling him to count his lucky stars. Why? Why would the Rosha have died during the plague of darkness? And why are we telling this to him? Oh, we want you to know that if you would have been there, you would have died? Why is it important for the Rosha to know that? And I guess let's ask the most important question. The most important question is, what are we supposed to do with all of this? Now and here. What are we supposed to do with all this information? Because, of course, the purpose here is not just to understand the pshat of this, but to use it as a guiding light in our own personal Yetzias Mitzrayim as we struggle to go out of our own limitations. What does this all mean? Okay. To explain it, let's take a start. Let's start with this point. Let's start with this idea. Who actually did merit to leave Mitzrayim, and who did not. Rashi says the criteria was that those who didn't want to leave actually didn't leave. Let's start with that. What's the meaning of that? Those who didn't want to leave Egypt, they actually didn't go out. They died during the plague of darkness. What's the meaning of that? What's the significance of that? And why is that the criteria? Like I said before, what if a Jew did want to leave Mitzrayim, but he was an idol worshiper? He did merit to leave. What if a Jew didn't want to leave Mitzrayim, but he was a Jew who believed in Hashem and studied Torah and was a wonderful Jew? It turns out, my dear friends, that there is a terrible irony to the concept of freedom. And there's a terrible irony to the concept of liberation. And if you look around at what's going on in the world today, particularly in the United States of America as we speak, with all the talk that there is now, about freedom and about liberty and about union and about, the freedoms that we worship and work so hard for in the United States of America. If you pay attention to what's going on, it turns out there's a terrible irony. And the irony is that you can't force people to be free. You can't force it upon them. You can't free them and liberate them if they don't want to be free. You see, you can give people the right to choose to be free. You can give people the ability to exercise their, in Torah language, we call this free choice, right? It's the greatest gift. The rabbis taught us the greatest gift that Hashem gave human beings, and only human beings, is the ability to choose things. But this choice, this gift of free choice, we have the ability as human beings, as Jews, we have the ability to use it against ourselves. So Moshe comes to the Jews and tells them, my dear friends, it's time to be free. But he can't force them to be free, because forcing someone to be free is a contradiction in terms. If I force you to be free, then all I've done is I've made you my slave. You can't force freedom on people. All you can do is give it to them and offer it to them and say, here, if you'd like it, it's yours to keep. It's yours to have. It's yours to own. But in order for a person to be free, they have to consciously and willingly choose it, embrace it, and they have to be ready to fight for it. Because there are many forces in the world that will choose to take this freedom away from us. In this case, when we say there were Jews who didn't want to leave Mitzrayim, they didn't want to be free for whatever reason. And again, like I said before, their reasons perhaps were incredibly logical and justifiable. These were not Jews who could have been forced into freedom, because freedom is not the thing you can force a person into. Moshe Rabbeinu came to the Jews and said, look, my dear Jews, I can do miracles. I can, turn blood into water and water into blood. I can make frogs appear out of nowhere. I can do fantastic things. And I can come to you with the call of Hashem, and I can say, Hashem has sent me here to liberate you. But I can't force it upon you. There's no way. If you're going to be free, you are going to have to choose freedom. And if you choose freedom, Moshe Rabbeinu says, I can liberate you. I can liberate you as an emissary of Hashem from the darkest of spiritual and physical dungeons and take you to the promised land. But if you don't want to be free, if you don't choose it, if you don't embrace it, no matter where you are, I can't force it upon you. Moshe says that's not the way Hashem made the world. It's not how freedom works. It reminds me, of that very famous parable of Rabbi Akiva, where the fox sees the fish running around in the water. And the fox says to the fish, why are you scurrying about? Why are you swimming about? And the fish says, I'm afraid of the fisherman. The fisherman's going to catch me. And the fox says, shh, don't tell anybody. Come up here to dry land. I'll protect you. The fish says, are you out of your mind? In the water, I might survive. I might not. If I leave the water, I'm for sure dead. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I can offer you freedom, but I can't force you to be free. Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jews, what I'm talking to you about is your destiny forever. Paro was destined to be the slave driver of the Jews for 400 years. After 400 years, it was over. Moshe says, me, what I'm signing you up for? What I'm signing you up for is eternity. I'm not going to make you my slave for eternity. You have to choose this and you have to want it. If you want it, I can liberate you from anything. If you don't want it, I can't liberate you from anything. You're stuck. What I mean to say by this is not to be understood. Again, we're going to go through this slowly. But the first point here is, this is not a punishment in the sense where somebody's hitting you over the head or hitting you over the hands for making, for doing something wrong. This is a natural consequence of what's going on. After being stuck in Mitzrayim for 400 years, Moshe tells the Jews, look, guys, I can offer you freedom if you choose it. The definition of freedom simply doesn't allow me to force you into it. Tell me you want it. Tell me you'll choose it. Tell me you'll follow me and you'll follow Hashem into a desert. I promise you everything will work out. But you have to be ready to leave Egypt. And if you're not ready to leave Egypt, despite your best intentions and your best explanations for it, Moshe Rabbeinu says, there's nothing I can do here. I cannot force you into liberation. The best example on a psychological level to understand this is a person's ability to listen, a person's ability to hear what someone else is saying. You see, we can all learn tremendous things in life. We can learn tremendous things in Torah. We can learn tremendous things in wisdom. We can learn tremendous things in emotions. We can learn. There is stuff out there to learn about ourselves and about each other that is life-changing. That's amazing. No matter how long a person's lived, no matter how much knowledge and how much depth and how much wisdom they have, there's always an infinite amount to learn, as long as you're prepared to listen. But once a person says, no, I'm good. I don't need to learn. I don't need to hear. I don't need to delve deeper. Then it doesn't matter what anybody's going to tell you. It doesn't make a difference how deep the wisdom and how beautiful and how sweet the wisdom is in front of you. If you're not prepared to listen, there's no way for you to absorb it. Which is the reason, of course, why the Mishnah says that the definition of wisdom is the willingness and the readiness to learn. Perhaps for all the most justifiable reasons in the world, 80% of the Jewish people said, we don't want this freedom that Moshe is offering us. This is harrowing stuff. We don't want it. We don't want it. We don't need it. It's okay. The first thing to understand here in unraveling what went on during the plague of darkness, the first thing to understand is that these were Jews who could not be forced into freedom. It's kind of like you can never force a person, you can never and should never force a person to make certain decisions in life. Nobody should be forced to marry anybody they don't want. Nobody should be forced into a career they don't want. Nobody should be forced into any type of position that's not truly of their choosing, because you have to live with this forever. And Moshe said, and Hashem said, I won't do it. I won't force Jews into, if they choose to remain in Mitzrayim, if this is what they want, so be it. They will stay in Mitzrayim. And then the Torah says that they died in the plague of darkness. I'm going to quote something that somebody in this, I believe, I don't see everybody who's here on the share. I don't see everybody right now. But if it's okay with you, I'm going to, Mrs. Marsha Reines Josephi, I'm going to quote something that I heard from you a couple of years ago. Mrs. Josephi went touring a couple of years ago, before coronavirus, when it was still safe. And she ended up, well, it didn't end up there by mistake, but she toured the country of China. And she came back and made a presentation at one of our Sharetz Tefillah Lunch and Learns. And she said something that stuck with me. She said the Chinese have records of Jewish communities, large, vibrant Jewish communities that existed in China hundreds of years ago. Hundreds of years ago. There were Jewish communities. I don't even know how they ended up there. I don't know how they got there. I have no idea. Where they came from, weiß ich nicht. But there were large Jewish communities in China hundreds of years ago. We're talking about hundreds of years ago. We're talking about, if I remember correctly, we're talking about 500 years ago. We're talking about the days of the Rishonim. Before the days of the Shulchan Aruch. For the printing of the Shulchan Aruch. These entire communities were decimated and gone. Nothing left of them. They remain in the Chinese history books. And the Chinese, Goyim, have a theory on why and what happened to these thriving Jewish communities in China. Again, I don't remember the numbers. I don't know the numbers. Let's say we're talking about a few thousands of Jews, maybe tens of thousands of Jews. What happened to them? They're gone, nowhere to be found. Maybe some of their artifacts remain. That's about it. We have no remnants, we have no known descendants today of the Jews who existed in this part of the world from a few centuries ago. They're all gone. The Chinese Goyim say, we know why. You know why? Because they didn't have, listen to this, they didn't have spiritual leaders. They didn't have rabbis and rebbitzins and gedolim and gedolos who insisted and encouraged and held the Jewish community together with the strength of Yiddishkeit. They didn't have that. And so because of that, the communities disseminated, the communities assimilated, they intermarried, and there's nothing left. They were gone in a puff. You can read about them in the Chinese history books. That's where they are. Perhaps in a spiritual sense, we can understand that these 8 million Jews didn't, Rahman al-Islam, die in 3 days. But they died in a plague of darkness. Perhaps they didn't all perish immediately, tragically, in the course of 3 days. Like I said before, there would have been no way for 8 million Jews to have died and the Egyptians to not have noticed. But perhaps they died not a tragic, terrible death in the sense of, they didn't die in gas chambers, Rahman al-Islam. But they died because they chose to stay in Egypt. And eventually, with time, they assimilated and nothing was left. And here is the incredibly painful and the incredibly eternal lesson that the Torah is teaching us. Were these Jews justified in their choice? Perhaps they were. Moshe Rabbeinu at this stage didn't tell them how they were going to eat in the desert, how they were going to survive. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know how they were going to get there. They didn't know, Moshe Rabbeinu told them we're going to the land of Israel. There were people living in the land of Israel. They didn't know how they would be greeted. They didn't know how they would be welcomed. Even Moshe Rabbeinu himself doesn't know how all this is going to work. And when Moshe Rabbeinu first comes and tries to liberate the Jews, things get worse. Perhaps the Jews looked at Moshe Rabbeinu and said, who said he's the real deal? Who said he's the real one? Maybe he's a faker. Maybe he's an imposter. You want us to follow him out of Egypt into the abyss, into the desert, into the wilderness? How do we know where we're going? Perhaps they had the most logical reasons to choose to stay in Mitzrayim. Moshe says, I'm so sorry. If this is your choice, there's nothing I can do. I cannot schlep you out of Mitzrayim if you don't want to go. Stay in Egypt. And again, so they did. But it's the Torah's way of telling us, again, not necessarily immediately and not necessarily tragically, perhaps in a way that the Egyptians don't even notice. But under the cover of darkness, I want to understand darkness here, not just in a physical sense, but I want to understand darkness also in a spiritual sense. Under the cover of darkness, eventually nothing remained of any of these Jews. What happened to them? Perhaps the same as happened to the community of Jews in China centuries ago. Perhaps they assimilated. Perhaps they intermarried. Perhaps they slowly lost their identity in the Egyptian culture, and nothing remained of them. And the Egyptians never noticed. The Egyptians never noticed because it happens without catastrophe, and it happens slowly, and it happens without necessarily there being any major shakeup. It was precisely the freedom, hear me out, it was precisely the freedom that Moshe Rabbeinu gave these Jews that ended up being the cause of their own demise. They couldn't find it within themselves to use this freedom to choose to leave Mitzrayim and be free for all eternity. This, my dear friends, in many ways is painfully the story of our existence to this very day. I'm not a statistician. I'm not a great historian. I'm just a simple Jew. But to the best of my limited understanding, while the Holocaust, Rahman al-Islam, burned 6 million Jews in gas chambers, only God knows how many Jews have been lost after the Second World War to the freedoms that Baruch Hashem has blessed us with in the United States of America, to the assimilation and to the intermarriage and to the welcoming Goyish culture that we as Jews find ourselves in today, that threatens our numbers and that threatens our existence, perhaps just as much as open ravage anti-Semitism, perhaps even more. I dare say Hashem didn't want the Egyptians to know about this. Hashem didn't want the Egyptians to see Jews die this way. Why not? Because Hashem wanted to give the Jews till the last second, till the last moment, an opportunity to see themselves as the chosen nation, to see themselves as a light unto the nation, not a victim of the nation. And so Hashem does everything to make it possible so that the Jews can still choose, can still stand up and say, we want to be free. We want to be Jews. Hashem doesn't ever want to give a goy the ammunition to look at the Jew and go, you're just like me. As long as we can conceal this, as long as we can hide this, we're going to do this for as long as possible. But 80% of the Jews still chose to remain in Egypt. I think we have to say that this Rashi, or this idea, is meant to be understood also in a spiritual sense. It's hard to understand. It's hard to take this literally, that so many Jews died in 3 days and the Egyptians didn't notice. Perhaps it means that the Jews assimilated and died out slowly over many years, over many hundreds of years, over God knows how long. But it was all done, so to speak, under the cover of darkness, where the Egyptians, it never appeared as if the Jews were being struck by any type of catastrophe. Let's go back to the Pesach Seder. By the Pesach Seder, we sit down with this son, the Ben Rasha, the evil boy, the bad boy. And the bad boy, the Ben Rasha, is sitting at the Pesach Seder and he's not interested, right? He's pushing his matzah and he's pushing his mortar and he's eating the egg at the wrong time and he's doing everything wrong and he's just out of it. And the Rasha looks at the people around the table and the Rasha says, "What are you people doing? What is this to you?" And we tell the Rasha, Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, but if you would have been there, you would not have been redeemed because you're not interested in this. And those who weren't interested, those who didn't choose to be free, Hashem let them stay in Mitzrayim. Why are we telling this to the Ben Rasha? Why does he need to know it? Along came the Lubavitcher Rebbe and said, there's a hidden message to the Ben Rasha. There's a hidden message to this Rasha, to this young man who's disinterested and heartless and pushing his matzah and pushing his morah and being rude and being aggressive and being abrasive. And we're telling him, if you would have been in Mitzrayim, you would not have been redeemed. Says the Rebbe, there's a hidden message here. And you know what it is? You know what we're telling the Rasha? You're lucky you weren't in Mitzrayim. In Mitzrayim, you would have ended up dead. You know why? Because Mitzrayim was before the giving of the Torah. Before the giving of the Torah, before Matan Torah, before Hashem chose us as his chosen nation and gave us the Torah for all eternity, until then, your choice, the choice you had not to be redeemed from Mitzrayim, had devastating consequences. But now it's too late. Now the 20% of the Jewish people stood up in Mitzrayim and said, we choose life. Now the 20% of Jews in Mitzrayim stood up and said, we choose freedom. And they followed Moshe Rabbeinu be'eretz lo yizruah, into a barren land, and ended up in Har Sinai, and Hashem said, Anoichi Hashem Alekecha. Now it's too late. What do I mean it's too late? Now we say to the Ben Rasha, when Mashiach comes, every single Jew will be dragged out of Golus, no matter what. What if the Jew says, I don't want to leave Golus? What if the Jew says, I'm comfortable in my Lexus, I'm comfortable in my Tesla, I'm comfortable in my Mercedes, I'm comfortable in Beverly Hills, and I'm comfortable in Bel Air, and I'm comfortable in Golus, and I don't want to leave. Leave me in Mitzrayim. We tell the Ben Rasha, sorry, pal, you're out of luck. That ship has sailed. When Mashiach comes, please God, may it be speedily in our days, not a single Jew will be left in exile. Not a single Jew will be left in Golus. Not even a Ben Rasha. Too late. Once Hashem gave the Torah to every one of our ancestors, now it's inside of us. Now that Pintaliyid, now that Neshama, now that connection is there, and it's there to stay, and it's never going to leave. We tell the Rasha, you can shout and scream. In Yiddish, we say you can brikazach. And brikazach means you can protest and kick and fight and tantrum from today till tomorrow. Once Hashem gave the Jewish people the Torah and said, Anoichi Hashem Alekecha, he invested and cemented that level of connection, that relationship with every Jew, and it is eternal. Now, we're all free men. We're all proud Jews by virtue of the choice of our ancestors. And even if we want to, we cannot choose it to be differently. Now it's, so to speak, too late. So what do we tell the Rasha? We tell the Rasha, it's time for you to be honest with yourself. Embrace yourself, embrace your identity, embrace your existence, Embrace your past, embrace your present, and embrace your future. And this, my dear friends, is truly the message of Pesach and the message of Yetzias Mitzrayim. The message of Yetzias Mitzrayim is not just that 3,500 years ago, the Jews left Egypt. If that were to be the entire message, dare I say, the message is more painful than it is happy. Because for every Jew that left Egypt, 4 Jews didn't. But that's not the story. That's not the message. That's not Yom Tov of Pesach. That's not the meaning of Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim doesn't mean remember that 3,500 years ago, 20% of the Jewish nation left. That's not it. What is it really? What it is really is we say, remember that 3,500 years ago, 2 million Jews, our ancestors, set out on a journey. Set out on a journey led by Moshe Rabbeinu and led by Hashem. The journey continued and continues for 3,500 years and will not end until the coming of Mashiach. We are in transit. We are en route. Ilu Hayasham, over there in Mitzrayim, before the journey began, over there were devastating ramifications to the choices that were made. Disastrous. But we are all descendants of the 20% who left Mitzrayim. We are all descendants of 20% of Jews who witnessed the splitting of the sea and witnessed the drowning of the Egyptians and stood in front of Matan Torah and said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We are all the descendants of the Jews that Hashem married under that chuppah, under that Mount Sinai, and pledged his eternal unconditional love and commitment, as we pledged our unconditional love and commitment to Hashem for all eternity, no matter what. Which is the reason, the true reason why every Seder concludes with the words Lashon Haba B'Yerushalayim. People think it's just sort of some symbolic, message or gesture, please God, next year in Jerusalem at an exclusive Pesach program. No. Lashon Haba B'Yerushalayim, the prayer for the coming of Mashiach, is crucial. It's at the very crux, it's at the very essence of the entire experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yetzias Mitzrayim means that from that moment on until the coming of Mashiach, a Jew has no rest. A Jew finds no haven for himself and for his people until the coming of Mashiach, when we will all, please God, be reunited. Lashon Haba B'Yerushalayim means that Yetzias Mitzrayim has significance in the sense not just as a story that happened in the past, but something that we live with every single day. Our own exodus, our personal exodus from Egypt is in limbo until we experience the final Geula. And it's also here to remind us that no matter what we go through, no matter what the Jewish people have gone through in Europe and in China and in the United States of America, whether we're faced with open hostility or, God forbid, the challenges that we face today, where the assimilation rate, may Hashem protect us, is more than 50%. It's here to remind us that Hashem never turns his back on the Jewish people, and the Jewish people never turn their back on Hashem. As we study together this week the Parsha of Yetzias Mitzrayim, Vayehi be'etzem hayom hazeh, it wasn't that very day that Hashem finally liberated and took the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim. May it be the will of Hashem that this be the week, and this be the hour, and this be the moment, and this be the day where the process of Yetzias Mitzrayim finally reaches its conclusion, and will be reunited with all the Jews from all the generations, the Chachomim, and the Rishoyim, and the Tomim, and the Sheini, the Elishals, and everybody, and even the people that don't even come to the Seder, everybody, please God, will be reunited, and we'll all go together to our final Geula. This is the Shabbos, this is the Parsha of Geula, the Parsha of Redemption. May it happen speedily in our days, and when Mashiach comes, please God, and he looks at every single one of us, and scans our soul, may we have the merit to stand in front of Mashiach and say, we never once, not for a moment, got too comfortable in Golus. Given the choice, we would have never chosen Egypt over the land of Israel. We would have never chosen to be subservience instead of serving Hashem. We would have never chosen Paroi over Moshe, not for one moment. No matter how much Hashem blessed us with in Golus, we always remembered that this is not our place, and this is not our home, and this is not where we belong. We were always uncomfortable in Golus. And we woke up every morning and asked ourselves, is today the final day of redemption? May it be speedily in our days. Amen. Have a wonderful Shabbos.